Hello guys, and welcome to another video. Today, since we have already talked about useState, useEffect, and useRef, let us talk about how we can optimize our React application. And really, this is the best practice to use React because React is very much like a glass, let's say. You should be very careful how you use it because it can either be fast or it can crash your application. But anyway, you need to be aware of how re-render works and what you can use to actually stop the re-render from happening, or let's say cache or save, in a simpler term, a value so that it does not get recalculated, or let's say that in every re-render a value is mm, recalculated, or React, let's say, yeah, calculates the value again every re-render. But we can prevent that if we don't want it to calculate a value anyway. For example, in this example that we have, of course, we don't have the useMemo hook yet, so don't pay regard to the component name just yet. But anyway, in here, we just have a simple button that displays its current count value. So I should refresh this actually. Hmm. Was it 1000 already? Wait. Oh, right. It's because I'm okay. I keep forgetting about my variables and such. But anyway, where was I? Anyway, we just have a simple component wherein we have a button that displays its current count, well, expensive count right here. And this expensive count comes from the function called expensive calculation and takes in the variable or parameter which is called count, and this count is our state which keeps track of our counter, wherein we will increment it by 1 every time we click the button. Okay. And then an input, which pretty much takes the value equals to the current state of the text, and an on change wherein we just set the state of the text equal to the value of the input in every change. Okay. So of course you need to know some basics about React DOM like event handlers, the target, value, etc. And of course use states and such. But yeah, let's proceed how we can optimize this code. Okay. So in the expensive calculation, we just want the number. We just want to loop through from 0 to 1 million every time we call it, and then we just return the number. So in this case, since on first page load, we set the default state of the count to 0. So after that, we just call the expensive calculation function, pass on the value of the count, which is 0, and then we get 1 million on the button right here. That's why on the first page load, we get the value of the button's text to 1 million. And then after that, we just have an increment function, and we pass that onto the on-click event listener that is inbuilt in, well, buttons. Right. Wherein every time we click on this button, we will run this function. Okay. So this is a callback. So when we call this, we will call or invoke the function which is the state setter for the count right here. Wherein we will set the count from the current count value. We will increment it by 1. Okay. So now, since every time we change the value of a state, a component will re-render. So when a component re-renders, it will read this line of code again from top to bottom. Well, that's pretty much how I see it in in simpler imagination. So from top to bottom, that's pretty much how you re-render. So First, we check the state. What changes did we have? Well, we changed the count. Okay. Let's check for the things that used the variable count or the state count. Oh, in here. Well, we'll still re-render this anyway, even if we did not change the count. Okay, so every re-render, we will run this because this is part of the component. So we will rerun this. So let's run the expensive calculation, wherein we will loop through from 0 to 1 million every time. And we'll pass on the value of the count, of course. So every time we click this, from 1 million, we have 1. So set count from previous count to 1. And now it will be 2. So again, 2, then 3, and so on and so forth. So now the keyword here is that on every render, this gets triggered. Okay? So React will read this and say, oh, okay, let's run this. Since where um there's no condition that says, okay, how can I phrase this? Because there is no condition present that says or that sets a condition on when is the time that we can only run this function. Okay, so we need to set a condition wherein we will say to React that, okay, only run this code on a specific condition. For example, when the count changes. Because when our input changes or text, we don't want this to run, now do we? Because the count will not change anyway. Yeah. So for example, every time we set the count, of course we want to change the value of the count or expensive count. But if you want to change the value of the input, we don't want this to run. But in our implementation right now, if you check, I'm going to type a lot, it's lagging, as you can see. It takes that much amount of time. So every time I type into the keyboard, React will loop through or will loop from 1 million, from 0 to 1 million. Each time I press, excuse me, each time I change the value of the text. And since we are changing the value of the input one character by character, so like when I type on a character inside the input, we will trigger a re-render. So when I type it a lot of times, of course, we will trigger a lot of re-renders. So a lot of re-renders means this will run that amount of times. For example, if I type 2 times, this will run this by twice as well. So 2 clicks, 2 runs, because 2 re-renders. And we can actually keep track of that with use effect, but I think I will not do that. So what if we try to have an if condition? How can we have an if condition? Well, maybe something like let the count outside, because that's how I usually do it in vanilla JavaScript. But this is not really the answer. But why don't we try this out if it works? Of course, this is not the correct implementation, but let's try. Oh my god, this is so bad. Why am I showcasing it this way? It shouldn't be like this. Anyway, if count is not equal to birth count, maybe, then expensive, wait, let expensive calculation is equals to, oh wait, let expensive count should be count. Expensive count is equals to expensive calculation count. Then ref count is equals to expensive count. I think. Yeah, this won't work. Uh, yeah, this won't work. What am I thinking? Okay, I shouldn't confuse you guys any further. I'm getting confused as well if I'm doing this. This is not the right way to do this anyway. Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting, but I will not like press on further in this kind of case. I might try to play around with this later, but let's move on to the explanation of how we can, you know, not make it lag when we change the input. Well, right now we can definitely not make it lag because we're not doing the expensive calculation. Okay, let's try to put that back. Once expensive count is equals to expensive calculation count. Yeah. All right. To actually make this simpler to see that every time we re-render, every time we change the state, the component re-renders, we can just say inside the component console log re or rather render. There we go. Okay. So if I oh wait, say const expensive count for now is equals to count. Just like that. For now, just for now. Okay. So we have a 0. So let's go to console and check it out. There we go. So on first mount or first render page load, we render it. And again, it's rendered twice, as I've said in the previous video. It's because we are using React.strict mode. So if we check the main.jsx, we have this. I don't know the reason why it's doing that, but just take note of that. Because, you might stress yourself why it's um, re-rendering twice. But anyway, let's try to click the button now. There we go. And if I change the input, it's console logging the rendered state as well. Yeah, it's twice, right? Yeah, it's doing it twice. Okay. Hmm. Good. Very good. All right. So how can we um like prevent this from, let's say, running, even if how can we prevent this from running when we change a state unrelated, or a state that is not relevant to this variable right here, which is const expensive count is equals to expensive calculation count. So we need a full way to actually make this not run on a render that's not relevant to the count right here. Well, there's something which is what we call, which you would have guessed by now after 30 minutes, is useMemo, which is the name of the component with useMemo. So if I say useMemo, we'll say to React that, oh, please cache or save or memoize is what they call it, this value that is returned from the expensive calculation function. And I want you to run this function again only if the count changes. So this is the condition that we set to this useMemo, which is what we passed inside the dependency array. Okay, so this useMemo takes in a callback function like this. It's just a callback, which is then will call and return, no, which is what will, excuse me. So this callback function will call whatever, okay, excuse me, let me rephrase that again. This useMemo will call this callback function, which is this arrow function I'm highlighting. And since we are saying here that we want to return, okay, we are saying this that this callback function, we want this callback function to return the value of whatever is returned by the expensive calculation function. All right. And then the second parameter is a dependency array, just like useEffect in React. So in here, we want this useMemo to run, or rather, we want the useMemo's callback function, which we passed on inside, to run every time the count changes, okay? Or in this case, we want this callback function that I'm highlighting right now to run on a render if that specific render has changes to a state that we defined inside of the dependency array. Oh well, not just a state, mind you. It can be a state, a variable, a function, or such. Okay? Just like useEffects dependency array. So that means this useMemo is depending on the state called count. So now if I save this and hit refresh, yep, there's a bug with it, but bear with me. There we go. Okay. So now if I click this, it's still functioning correctly. So it's counting very slowly because it's from 0 to 1 million. But if I now try to type inside the input, as you can see, I can type as fast as I can. Hello there. Which is pretty cool. So now if I add, which is wrong, if I add the text here as a dependency array, wherein I want this to recalculate every time the text changes, as you can see, I get an error. But anyway, let's try this out. Okay. There we go. So now if I try to type inside once again, it will lag. That's because when the text state changes, we are telling useMemo to run its callback function every time the state called text changes. Okay, so this is how we can use the useMemo. Wow, that took a lot of time. Anyway, let's move on to the next optimization that we can do in React. All right, I forgot. Right, excuse me. I forgot to say one thing to make this, much clearer. So useMemo is saying that, okay, taking this callback function and this dependency array. All right. If this dependency, if the dependencies inside the dependency array, or if the items, or if the values inside the items of the dependency array does not change, then return the value that you currently have from the past render, or the saved value, or cached value, whatever you want to call it. But if it changes, or rather, but if a value changed, then run this callback function right here. And of course, this callback function should return a value, which then useMemo can use for the next re-renders. Okay, that's pretty much it. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, now for this next one. Doesn't look the best, but it's something. So this one is about it's about useCallback, the hook called useCallback. But let's also talk about the function called memo. Now, memo is used as a wrapper for components like so over here. We we're in we are telling React to only re-render this component if one of its props changes in value. So props meaning this right here, which I just destructured. Okay, so if the value of the count, or rather, if the value of the props, which are the state count, and the function add node changes in value, then we want to re-render this component. But if that is not the case, then we want to do nothing, or then we do not want, okay. But if there's no change in the value of the props, then we do not want to re-render this component at all, leaving it as is. Okay? Okay, I forgot to add an input, but anyway, so where was I? Okay, so we only want to re-render this component called withMemo only and only if the values of its props changes. So if the value of the count changes, okay, re-render the component. If the value of the add node changes, okay, re-render the component. But wait, the value of the function add node? Huh, what do you mean the value of the function add node? Okay. Then if we say value, is it the returned value of the function? Probably not. But let's try to check if this will actually re-render or not. So we can say that console.log render, right? So save that and refresh. There we go. Okay. Well, we rendered on first page load, and if we click add node, increment, it will run or even change the text. Oh, wait a minute. We said that with the memo, we will only re-render this if we increment the count in this scenario. Interesting. And as you noticed, we are actually not changing or not displaying the value of the nodes when we click, as you can see. And we are also not displaying the value of the text. So how can we prevent this component from re-rendering like this right here? We are console logging. So that means this component is being run by React every time we do anything in its parent container, which is up here. So since we are doing something with this parent container wherein we are changing the state, like the state of the text, the state of the adding nodes, hmm, how can we prevent this from happening? Well, one thing, we can remove the value of the count, or the rather the function add node, like so. And then I guess we can do something like this and move this button above, I guess. Let's try it out. There we go, as you can see, and if we refresh, okay. And now, as you can see, if I click add node, it does not console log. But if I increment, it will console log. And if I change the value of the state of the text, it will console log. Interesting. That is very nice. So that is the purpose of memo in React. When you envelop a component with memo, it will only render if the value of its prop changes. As you can see here, its only prop is the prop count or the state count. So if the state of the count, or rather if the value of the count changes, that is the only time this will re-render, or in this case will console log rendered. Very nice to know. But in this case, from the implementation earlier, how can we, let's say, prevent that? Or let's say maintain the same effect as we are having right now, but with the implementation from earlier, because maybe our users want it that way or whatever, you know. But let me recover that for a second. Okay, I think it's recovered. Yep. Okay, let's try to check this out again and see if it's the same. Uh-huh. No, no, no. I hope I didn't reveal anything there. Okay, anyway, because I'm not editing the videos that much. Well, not really editing, but anyway. Okay, let's try. Yep. Okay, there we go. We're back to its original behavior. Okay, since we're only depending on the value of the count for this to re-render, and really, we're only using this function add note right here inside this component. We are not using any value at all. So how can we prevent this from re-rendering even when we change the value of the text, which is completely irrelevant? Well, as I've said earlier, in when we were trying to know about useMemo, which is a hook for memoizing a value of something, like here the value of count returned by the expensive calculation. That is the same for functions, because generally, if thought about it, functions are most of the time just objects with iterators and blah blah blah, all the complicated stuff. But anyway, excuse me. So that means React is actually re-rendering this function as well. And one thing to note, the reason for that is because most of the time, functions are using, or well, generally in this case, functions are just closures. And these closures are using values that is outside of its scope. In this case, the scope, which would be up here, either states or variables, for example, const is greater than 3 is equals to count is greater than 3, and then we can say that we have a excuse me, we can say that whenever we click the add node, we can just console.log, excuse me, is greater than 3, something like that. I don't know, maybe. Oh wait, is it the other way around? Oh, no, no, no. Okay, okay. So let's say we have something like this. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So if I click add node, it will say true. But if I refresh and just click add node, it will say false. Okay. So that means this function right here is keeping track of the value of is greater than 3. That also means this function is re-rendering alongside this right here. Okay. So everything inside is changing. That's why this component as well is changing alongside this overall component above, because the function, which is what we call add node, is changing every time this component over this overall component re-renders. Okay, so the way to prevent this with memo from re-rendering is to envelop or enclose this callback function or this function or this closure inside a use callback hook. So we are saying to React is that we want this function to be memoized or cached or saved inside the hook use callback. Okay. Oh, oops, not like that. Okay, yeah. And we need to provide it a dependency array just like useFact and useMemo. Okay, as you can see, we get an error because we need to provide it dependencies. But anyway, let me walk you through once again. So we are saying to React that, okay, let's use the hook use callback. And inside this use callback, we will return, well, a callback. Since this is a function, when invoked, it can either return void, which means it will return nothing, or it can return a value. In this case, the hook use callback, which is pretty much just a function, returns a callback function, which is either a memoized or saved function or a new function instance. And by that, I mean that, excuse me, the old function will have old values, while the newer function will have newer values inside. Okay? All right. And this use callback will return either the saved value of the callback function that is inside of it as the first parameter right here. So in this case, our first parameter is a callback function, which is the same as what we had earlier from add node. Okay? So this function is saying that we want to set nodes and we want to console log is greater than 3. And just like the same in every dependency arrays, this is an indicator or a condition wherein if the values inside of its dependencies changes, then that is the only time we will reevaluate, recalculate, or change or renew the function or value that we have inside, or the value that we will return. And in the case of the use callback hook, it will return a callback, either a memoized callback or saved callback, or a new callback instance or function, which in this case, this one right here. Okay, so if I try to save this while ignoring the warning, by the way, this is not inbuilt in VS Code, this is from an extension and such. Anyway, let's try to refresh this and try to ignore the warning. Let's see what kind of bug we will have. So based on this, we don't want to render this every time this occurs. Or okay, let me organize my thoughts. Okay, we only want to render the with memo component every time the value of the count changes. And since the value of the add node, well, we don't really use it, we just call it inside the component. You don't want to re-render this component whenever the value of the count does not change in its parent. Okay, so we only want to console log increment or render when the count changes, in this case incrementing the count. But we don't want it to console log rendered, there we go, when a state or when its parent component re-renders. Just like here, as you can see, it's not console logging because, well, the count is unaffected. And we are also using the use callback for the function add node. Okay. Oh, oops, that's my bad. Wait. Okay, all back to normal. All back to normal. Whew. All right. So as you can see, this is not changing its, let's say, instance or reference or value. You can say that's why this is not console logging render. That means we are successfully not re-rendering this component below, which is with memo. Okay. But if I click, let's say, add node, well, of course, we're going to say false right here because, well, the count currently is 0. But if I say increment it by 4, it will it will still say false. Like, what? It's already greater than 4. But if I click this add node, it's still saying false. Huh, why is that? Well, that's because this function still has the old value of is greater than 3. It's not re-evaluated or recalculated or re-rendered by React. So really that is both the downside and the beauty of React. It will use up your memory because it creates new instances every re-render, or it can, you know, save something. It's based on how you optimize it. And these hooks are very magical and useful if you want to save up on memory. But if you don't want, then you can go cray and just re-render everything, you know? But anyway, let's try to put is greater than 3 here, and everything should be working just as expected. Okay, so click add node false, and we're not console logging re-render, even if we are adding or changing the state of nodes, or changing the, or rather re-rendering the parent component right here. So every time we change the nodes, we are re-rendering the component, or we are re-rendering the parent component, okay? And if I increment, that's the only time we will console log the render. Again, increment, and when I click one more time, this will increment twice, or not. It's okay, that's interesting. Oh, excuse me. Really? 1, 2, 3. Whoa, okay, so I was wrong about that. Ooh, very nice. Okay, I'm getting absorbed by this again, even though I'm recording anyway. Wait. 1, 2, 3. Then it should, or yeah, still once. It's only console logging twice because of strict mode. But anyway, that's good to know as well. So when a value of the state changes, this will not actually trigger a change. Oh wait, never mind. I was wrong in the first place. Okay. So what I'm talking about is that I thought that when the value of this changes, this will re-render twice, but that should not be the case. That's because this is only saying that we want to memorize this component and only re-render if its props, the value of its props changes. So any of its props, okay? So even if the value of the count does not change, but the value of the add node changes, or the function changes, then we will render this component. And likewise, even if the value of the add node does not change, so in this case, we are memoizing this with use callback, But if the value of the count changes, we want to re-render this. As you can see, it's been re-rendered. And in this case, it's not going to re-render. Okay? So in this case, when this value changes, it doesn't matter. It will still render just once. So what I thought is that it will re-render twice. Of course, that's not the case. Okay. What else? I think that's all. Congratulations. Wow. Excuse me. Mm-hmm. Oh, that was wow. Okay. Anyway, that's very amazing. So now you have learned about from the previous video, use state, use effect, and use ref, which is pretty much what you need when you're starting out in React. Of course, with use effect, you will learn about dependencies. So what kind of variables or values will something depend on? And it will run if it changes or not. So pretty much just like conditionals, but in this case, it's implicit. I don't know what it's called, declarative, imperative. I don't know, but it's somewhere along those lines. But yeah, this is how you can optimize React app, wherein you know how it's like having a chain reaction. Okay, take note of that. It's sometimes annoying and scary at the same time with chain reaction in React. It's like you unintentionally make a infinite loop or like make a lot of calls to a backend and then like you think or rather that backend you're using is a third party and you pay for it. It's like, oh my god, no, please no. But yeah, that's why it's important to actually use a local dev environment. Okay, all right, for testing. Anyway, that's all. So it's very important to know how React re-renders, and by that I mean like React always make a new instance of something. It does not mutate most of the time, okay? Most of the time is the keyword here. And really, you're going to get used to making new instances instead. Just like here. And I'm just trying to get used to mutations, just like push, instead of like having the spread operator because it's using up memory. It's like me trying to learn some, optimizations in programming, but you should pay no attention to that. And the video has ended like 5 minutes ago. Anyway. But yeah, you should take heed of my warning of infinite loops, and you should understand how React re-renders. Okay? React is pretty much a bunch of lines of code that was built by wonderful engineers, which of course made this somewhat complicated and very magical and magnificent at the same time for complicated UI like interactive stuff like functions built on top of functions and blah 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 blah. But yeah, you should always know at least a little about what goes on under the hood, on why it re-renders, which is dependent on what, and on conditionals, loops, and memory, blah, okay. Anyway, I'm getting on a rant here and I should end the video here. Okay, I hope you learned something about optimizations in React and how you can implement it. And good luck on your development journey. Excuse me. Happy learning. Bye bye.